Good morning to you all. You're watching World Talks because every word matters. And I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Donald Trump imposed a 25% tariff on all goods imported from neighboring Mexico and Canada and 10% on goods from China. This has sparked a response in kind, leading to increased trade tensions. The U.S. president has earlier also threatened the European Union with tariffs, but so far has not implemented them yet. Could the U.S. tariffs spell a beginning of a global trade war? What's at stake for the EU and what would be a fitting response? Joining me now is Witold Orłowski from PwC, Chief Economic Advisor. Good morning, and thank you for joining me here on the program. So we are looking at increased tensions when it comes to trade. How do you think those tariffs, those possible tariffs we've heard from Mr. Trump earlier today, it's been all over the news, are going to actually influence the EU?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what Mr. Trump is aiming at. Because he's talking a lot. He's making some statements that actually from the economic point of view are absurd. And kind of this information that Canada is getting a subsidy from the United States of $2 billion a year. Everybody's asking himself a question, what is he talking about? I mean, the number is totally absurd. But it seems that it's not a problem for Mr. Trump because he's just using a number and doesn't matter and doesn't want to justify it or to give any details why this number looks like that and so on and so on. So we don't know exactly what he's doing. He clearly has spent all the presidential campaign claiming that he will do something with the trade. He said all that the custom duty tariff is a beautiful word. So he just kind of accepted that the trade shouldn't be free. That it's beautiful to use the custom duties, so to tax the imported goods. And for the time being, he started his war already with China, with Canada and Mexico. Now we are waiting because it seems that the European Union is next in line. We don't know what he really wants because. In a sense, just increasing taxes, it's using custom duties. It's an economic absurd. I mean, it may please some of his constituency because not because of the economic factor, but because just of thinking, oh, how good it is that America is finally punishing all its enemies.
But at the same time, it seems to be punishing itself because let us not forget that with this package of tariffs for Canada and for Mexico, it's going to actually affect its own economy to a great extent as well, don't you think?
Well, I already said that from the economic point of view, it's an absurd. First, Mr. Trump is hurting the Americans as much as the others. Secondly, all this talk about the word cheating America is an absurd. There's no cheating in it. It's a normal economy. Mr. Trump tends to think in categories that, please believe me, the economists were thinking about the trade in categories that the import is a loss and the export is a gain only, but 300 years ago. In the last 250 years at least, we know that this is not true, that both sides benefit from the trade and both sides would suffer if the trade is reduced because it reduces the specialization, raises the cost, raises the inflation in both countries.
Mm-hmm. Considering what we know now.
So it's just let me finish. From the economic point of view, it's an absurd. But maybe this is not all. This is not really about the economics of trade. This is about the politics, about this feeling of America regaining power of America and making it great again, whatever the cost. And it may also have some impact, like It may also have some meaning like a tool to get some gains from Europe, from Mexico, from Canada, not necessarily linked directly to the trade.
So changing optics, I listened to Peter Morici earlier today, an economist and an expert in the field as well, and he said that he is expecting trade war too. And during last trade war, Europe was sort of caught off guard. Do you think that this time the sort of code of conduct for the European Union when it comes to U.S. tariffs is going to be different?
Well, we'll see. I mean, the trade war, if it's a full-scale trade war, it's a catastrophe for everybody. Europe definitely will suffer more than the United States because Europe is more export-oriented economy. The United States are more import-oriented. But that's probably something that Mr. Trump doesn't realize, that we are talking about so-called visible exports. So the exports of goods produced Europe, sent to, especially cars, sent to America. But America, on the other hand, has got a huge interest in so-called non-visible trade. Means, for example, services. All this, Google, Amazon, Facebook, whatever. And the third point is America is also pretty much participating in the global game by selling a lot of its bonds. And altogether, that leads to a situation that, actually both sides, if this trade is somehow destroyed or is greatly touched, everybody will suffer. America will suffer less in the form of just export, because the normal response of a country that has got the hostile increase of tariffs against it is to increase its own tariffs, and Europe will definitely do it if America does it. But then America is hard, maybe less in the exports of visible goods, but much more in the exports of intellectual property, of services, and so on. So everybody will suffer. Europe definitely will have to deal with it, to deal with the problem. I mean, we shouldn't forget that Europe is actually, together with the United States, it's one of the two biggest markets in the world. So Europe has got a powerful
definitely
economy.
some potential there.
I mean, Europe will have to survive with U.S. tariffs. There's no doubt about that. That will be painful, but as I said, by the end of the day, it will be painful for America as well.
So would you say that there is a sort of a leeway, there is a sort of an opportunity opening up, and Europe should actually have better trade ties with, for example, Mercosur, Japan, Vietnam, Canada? What's your opinion on that?
Well, the point is that for Europe, the trade with the United States, it's not really a vital story. Obviously, the more diversified the exports, the better. But the trade. But this is not the story that Europe will have to kind of frantically fight for other markets. I guess Europe will survive that. The bigger problem is not really will Europe find the way to sell, or the problem is that the trade war, both sides, by the end of the day, probably, will lead to the great deterioration of the economic growth. It may lead to the global recession, and that will hurt everybody. I guess earlier, the Americans will recognize that it's painful for them. So I do not think that this war is going to, if it happens, obviously, is going to change dramatically the structure of European exports or something like that.
And
at the end of the day, the biggest, let me just finish. The biggest customer of European countries, of the EU countries, are the other EU countries. So basically, this is not really that Europe is dependent on the exports to America, although it will be painful because, for example, the German cars are selling very well in America.
How much do you think that the inflation would, after the trade war, would be lifted after that period of time that you mentioned when it takes Americans to think about the possible consequences for their economy as well? How bad would the inflation be for Europe?
No, I don't think that Europe will suffer because of the increase of the inflation. I guess it's much more likely that the United States will have the increase of the inflation because given the fact to what extent the American, for example, consumption goods are produced in China, in Mexico, in Canada, that's something like almost 55% of the imports of the United States, and imposing tariffs there would lead to the increase of prices. The trade with Europe is not so important for America. It's not so important for Europe neither. The problem is rather with this feeling that the German exports, the moods in Germany depend so much on the global trade. So inflation, yes, I guess in the United States more than Europe. Europe may suffer because of a prolonged period of the economic stagnation in Germany, and therefore a slow growth in the whole of Europe, but not necessarily about the inflation. Obviously, there seems to be always a way out of the problems. Mr. Trump already has mentioned something a few weeks or months ago, I can't remember, that the trade with Europe could be left untouched if Europe agrees to buy more of the American gas, LNG gas. And so I guess still the fact that the tariffs were not raised for Europe immediately, but for three main trade partners, that may indicate that Mr. Trump is still kind of ready to negotiate.
Any major effect that you think it's going to have on Poland?
Well, Poland is, yes, Poland is actually, for Poland it's important because of two factors. I mean, the first point is that the product that is especially disliked by Mr. Trump are the German cars. And he seems to belong to the people who prefer the American, big American cars and dislike Mercedes and other and Porsche from Germany. And the problem is that the Polish industry is pretty much linked to the German automotive industry. I mean, Poland is a big, maybe even the biggest supplier of parts and various components of the German cars. So it directly may hurt our exports, our export to Germany, not necessarily to the United States. Our export to the United States is not big, but to Germany, yes. And the second point is probably more important, that if there's a trade war between the US and the European Union, that may badly damage the business sentiment in Germany. And Germany is already in big troubles, and we are all in troubles because Germany has got this terrible mood about the economic future. And if there's a trade war, the mood in Germany will even worsen, because Germany is so much an export-oriented country. Despite of having this huge internal market, I mean, Germany is more than any other country, probably China is another one, so much linked to export. So this indirect effect of Germany being in bad shape, the German economy, will although immediately influence the prospects of Poland's growth.
And we will have to put a full stop there because our time has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining me, Witold Orłowski, Chief Economic Advisor at the PwC Poland. Thank you. And so this would be all for now here on World Talks, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.